Welcome everyone to another week of Ramban ala Parsha. Although the slight twist this week, since it's Chanuka, I thought we could take some time out and actually do a Ramban on Chanuka. Now, you might say to yourselves, and you should think to yourselves, wait, that's kind of crazy. How could there be Ramban ala Torah that's on Chanuka, which comes much later? And yet there is. It's the very first Ramban on Parshas Ba'aloscha. It's well known. I assume that most people generally don't follow the Shir with a Ramban in front of them, but even if you do, you probably don't have a Ramban al Ba'aloscha. So I'll try to read it to you with what Rabbi Dr. Chaim Salvation used to refer to as a Kriya HaMe'ira Ta'inayim, a reading that's so clear that you can actually follow along as if it's inside. Now, the context is as this follows. The end of Parshat Naso, as we all know, is one of the most boring parts of the Torah, because it's the Karbanos HaNesiim written exactly, more or less, the same thing 12 times over. And then you have Parshas Ba'aloscha, Ba'alotcha Hanerot El Mul Pnei menorah Ya'iru Shivat Hanerot. And Rashi and the Medrash and everybody wants to know, what's the Parshas HaMenorah doing here? We already got the mitzvah in the Torah. What does it have to do with the Karbanos HaNesiim? What does it have to do with the Chanukas HaMizbeach? And so the Ramban quotes Rashi and the Medrash. Lama nismacha parshat menorah lachanukat hanesiim. The answer is Lefi kishera'a Aaron chanukat hanesiim chalsha da'ato shelo haya imahem b'chanuka lohu v'lo shivto. 12 shvatim brought karbanos for the Chanukas hanesiim. Levi wasn't one of them. So says the Medrash, that was what bothered the Aaron HaKohen. He became literally depressed or disappointed when he saw he wasn't part of it. Amallah Kadosh Baruch Hu, Chayecha. It's a lashon of Shvuah, Shelcha Gedola Mishalahem, She'ata Madliku Meitivet Hanerot Boker Va'erev. Lashon Rashi Mimidrash Agada. Right? Very, very well known. But anybody who thinks about it should ask the following questions. And the Ramban really goes to town. He says, what's Rashi talking about? V'lo nitba'er li lama nichamo b'hadlokat hanerot, v'lo nichamo b'ktoret. Ketoret was such a wonderful thing. Everybody wanted to bring the ketoret. Why didn't he say, you get to bring the ketoret? U'b'chol ha'karbanot, u'minchat ha'chavitin, u'va'avodat yom ha'kippurim she'ena ksher el habo. How could Aaron have felt bad? He gets to go into the Kodesh HaKodashim one time a year. No one else gets to do that. V'hu nichnas lifnai v'lifnim. Vishoya Kadosh Hashem Omeid Behechalo L'Shareit U'Levarech Bishmo Vishivto Kulo Misharte Elokeinu. Right? Kohanim are the most privileged Shevet. Shevet Levi is the most privileged Shevet. How could Aaron have felt bad that he was excluded from the Karbanos? Right? He brought more Karbanos during the Yimei HaMiluim, during the Chanukas HaMishkan. He brought all the Karbanos. What's he worried about? So says the Ramban. V'im Tomar Shehayu Chova. You might say that Aaron thought to himself, yes, but all these things that I'm doing, I'm commanded by God. But these Nesiim, the other Nesiim, they all volunteered in a way that I didn't. And that bothers him. How's the menorah going to help, says the Ramban? Gam hadlakat hanerot shenichamu b'chova v'nitztava aleha. Right? If the problem was that he didn't get to volunteer like the other Shvatim, they got to volunteer, how could the menorah help? Right? The menorah, the hadlakat hanerot, the work around the menorah, it was obligatory. That wouldn't help Aaron feel better if the reason why he felt disappointed was because he didn't have a chelek in the volunteerism of the other Nesiim. How's that going to help? Now says the Ramban, and now we get to Chanuka. Aval inyan ha'hagada hazo lidrosh remez min ha'parsha al Chanuka shel neirot shehaita bebayit sheni al yidei Aharon uvanav. Ritzoni lomar chashmonai kohen gadol uvanav. No, God is hinting here to the fact that there will be a volunteerism on behalf of Aaron's descendants. The Chashmonaim, of course, were Kohanim. Right? And later on, the Ramban will have negative things to say about them. Because it says, Lo Yasur Shevet Mi Yehuda, the rulers of Bnei Israel are supposed to come from Shevet Yehuda, and obviously the Chashmonaim did not come from Shevet Yehuda. Nevertheless, U'b'lashon hazeh mitzatih b'Miglat Sdarim, he said, I saw this in the Miglat Sdarim written by Rabbeinu Nisim. So he says as follows, Omar, Kevan shehi krivu shnei masa shvatim v'lo hikriv Shevet Levi, Amar lo HaKadosh Baruch Hu l'Moshe, daber el Aaron v'amar to yesh Chanuka acheret, sheyesh ba hadlakat hanerot, va'ani oseh ba liYisrael al yidei banecha nisim u'tshua v'chanuka shekruya al shemam. There's going to be a day that comes later on, during Bayis Sheni, when God says, your children Aaron are going to reinstitute hadlakas haneros, and they're going to reinstitute it. The Ramban hints here, but I think that's the point, out of a sense of volunteerism, right? It wasn't Yaharg Val Yavor to be madlik the neros in the Beis HaMikdash. The Romans didn't answer something that the Chashmonaim had to sacrifice their lives for, but they chose to. They were unwilling to live a b'diavad life, and they chose to. Lefikach hismich parsha zo leparshat Chanukat HaMizbeach. That's the point, says the Megillat Starim, quoted by the Ramban, that Aaron should feel better that he's going to have descendants who are going to volunteer in a way that no one else in the Jewish people did. V'ra'iti od bi'lamdeinu, another name for the Medrash Tanchuma, v'chein b'Medrash Rabbah, Amal HaKadosh Baruch Hu l'Moshe, lechem ol Aaron al tityarei ligidola mizot atamuchan. Your descendants are going to get a greater chelek and have a more honored position. Kolzman shebeit hamikdash kayam heim nohagim. When there's a Beis HaMikdash, you have to bring the karbanos. That's fine. Aval hanerot le'olam el mul pnei menorah iru. V'chol habrachot shenatati lecha levarech et banai einan b'telim le'olam. Says the Ramban in the Pshat and Psukim, there's another section which doesn't make sense. Birchas Kohanim comes immediately before the Chanukat HaMizbeach, before the Karbanot HaNesiim. What's that doing there? Says the Ramban, it's the same exact point. When the Beis HaMikdash doesn't work, God forbid, you might think, okay, the role of the Kohanim no longer exists. No, he says, the children of Aaron are going to take a position, and we're going to light candles even after the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash, based on their heroic action. And that's Chanukah, that's the Chanukah that we're celebrating now. It's all based on the Chashmonaim. And he says beforehand, this section of the Birkat Kohanim makes the same exact point. Birkat Kohanim is going to survive the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash. Okay, in Chutz La'aretz it only survives it a number of times a year. In Eretz Yisrael it survives it every single day. But that's exactly the point, says the Ramban. God is saying to Aaron HaKohen, you might feel bad that you didn't volunteer. Don't feel bad, because the spirit of volunteerism is going to live on in your children, and it's going to be expressed in the Chashmonaim, the Kohanim Hagdolim, that are going to take a leadership position in Chanuka, that are going to reinstitute, not just in the Beis HaMikdash, but in our homes. Nowadays, we're going to light candles to remember the candles that the Chashmonaim lit in the Beit HaMikdash, that they fought over it, and they won over it. And a related point is we're going to do Birkat Kohanim, and you're supposed to remember these things. And I think when we light menorah tonight, we're supposed to remind ourselves of the fact there was the Kohanim Hagidolim, the Beit Chashmonaim, Matityahu and his brothers, who reinstituted this mitzvah, and that they reinstituted not out of obligation. They were moser nefesh to reintroduce lighting the menorah in the Beis HaMikdash, just like we, at some point, maybe this has to do with whether you light outside or not, are supposed to be moser nefesh, not technically, halachically, but the idea that Chanukah stands for the Mesiras Nefesh. And it was, it's just a brief period in time, right? The Rambam says, in the very beginning of Hilchos Chanukah, in Parak Gimel of Purim and Chanukah, he says, all this was destroyed, and then what happened? V'tzar lahem liYisrael ma'od mipnehem v'lachatzum lachatz gadol ad sherichem aleihem elokei avotenu v'hoshiyam miyadam v'hitzilam v'gavru b'nei Chashmonai hakohanim hagidolim. And the b'nei Chashmonaim, they won a great victory. V'hargum v'hoshiyam Yisrael miyadam v'hamidum melech min hakohanim V'chazra malchut liYisrael yeter al 200 shana ad churban hasheni. So the Rambam says we celebrate Jewish sovereignty, even if it's temporary, right? It lasted for 200 years. It didn't really, historically, people argue that it's much less than them, but the temporary sovereignty is something we should celebrate. A separate point, which we're not going to get into, but the Ramban thinks that the reason why the Beit Chashmonai didn't last is because specifically they were Kohanim, right? Lo Yasur Shevet Mihuda, as the Ramban's going to tell us in Vayechi, that's a halacha. The kings of the Jewish people are supposed to be Shevet Yehuda, not the Kohanim. They're supposed to be the religious leaders, not the political leaders. Okay, but I thought it was fascinating to point out that Ramban that exists at the beginning of Baalotcha that talks about the hint in the Torah to Chanuka that we're celebrating now. Now, let's get back very quickly to Parshas Miketz. Okay. It says the Pasuk in Perek Membet, Pasuk Chaf Aleph, and it's really fascinating what the Ramban sees here. Vayomru ish el achiv. Right? They're getting out of jail. They're going home without Shimon. Vayomru ish el achiv. Aval ashemim anachnu al achinu. Right? We're guilty for what we did to our brothers. What should the next Pasuk say? Because they sold him. Asher ra'inu tzarat nafsho b'itchaneno eleinu v'lo shamanu. We heard him begging, we heard him crying, and we didn't listen to us. Al kain ba'a eleinu hatzara hazot. That's why we're having this problem. Says the Ramban, Asher ra'inu tzarat nafsho b'itchaneno eleinu chashvu lahem ha'achzariyut la'onesh gadol yoter min ha'mechira. An unbelievable psychological insight. Says the Ramban, when they remembered back, it wasn't the sale of Yosef that they felt so guilty about. Yeah, obviously that was terrible. But it was the fact that he begged them, and he was their brother, and they disregarded it. Ki haya achehem bisaram mitchanein umitnapel ifnehem v'lo yirachamu. He begged them, and they had no mercy on him. And that made them worse people in the actual sale. Now, says the Ramban, get into the pshat of the Ramban. V'hakatuv lo siper zesham. But it doesn't appear in the psukim. It doesn't say any place that Yosef begged them. Two possibilities, says the Ramban. Either, mipnei shahadava yadua beteva ki yitchanein adam le'achav bevo'o leida laharalo v'yashbiyem b'chayavihem v'yasek kol asher yuchal l'atzion nafsho mimavet. Right? Obviously, says the Ramban, the Torah doesn't have to tell us. When you're about to sell a person into slavery, of course he begs. Of course he makes all kind of promises. Of course he says, I'm not going to tell our father. That's the thing anybody would do. Another possibility. The Torah simply didn't want to expand on the evilness of the Shvatim. Right? The Torah didn't want to tell us that Yosef begged them. It's hard to read. It's like there are parts of Miketz that are hard to read. Because Yosef is being mean to his brothers, and you want to just wait for the reconciliation, but you got to wait. O miderech haktuvim shemikatzrim b'makom echad u'ma'arichim bo b'makom acher. Or says the Ramban, it often happens in the Torah. When the Torah repeats things, it doesn't give you all the details every time. It'd be boring that way. The Torah tells you the basic outline of the story. Then, when the Torah repeats the story, when the brothers say, it was such a terrible thing, we didn't have mercy on him, you're supposed to understand that that's what happened. Okay, so that's the first major point of the Ramban. First of all, he says that the brothers felt more guilty for being hard-hearted than for selling their brother. And they were hard-hearted because their brother begged them and they didn't listen to him. Why doesn't the Torah say so? Either because it's just, you don't want to pile onto the Shvatim. Okay, they did something wrong. But it would be really, really hard to read about Yosef promising and begging and question all the things Yosef almost certainly did, but they don't appear in the Torah because it would be mean to do that. Or the Torah doesn't have to tell us it every single time. It tells us it now, and we understand that it happened back then in last week's Parsha. Second part of this Ramban, which is just as fascinating. V'nei Reuven analahem halo amarti lachem al techetu vayeled v'lo shematem. The Ramban wants to know why al techetu vayeled and not va'al techetu bi Yosef. It's an unbelievable insight. V'nei Reuven analahem shekvar amarti alechem b'shat maaseh Shelo techatuvo ki yeledhu. Reuven said he's just a kid. Umipnei na'aruto chatalachem. Yes, he's done things wrong to us, it's true. But he's immature. Give him a chance to grow up. V'ra'ui lachem lahavir al chata'at ne'urav. You should recognize he's an immature child. Yes, maybe he wants attention, maybe he's acting out. But that's not a reason to sell him into slavery. It's not a reason to end his life, to kick him out of the family. And that's why it says al techatu bayeled, because that was the point of Reuven. Okay, I think that's an amazing insight on the Ramban's part. Now, we continue reading. A few psukim later, says the Torah, no, we don't want that Ramban. We want pasuk lamed dalet. When they come back and they tell Yaakov Avinu, this is the deal, right? Shimon has been taken captive in Mitzrayim, but they'll free him, and more than that, they're telling their father, Yosef said, bring your little brother, and I'll know that you're truthful people. Then, et achichem etein lachem ve'et haaretz tischaru. Then I'll give you back Shimon, and you'll be able to do whatever you want, in the land, and you'll be able to do business in the land. But the Ramban is bothered by the fact that Yosef never said that. He never said, come back and you'll do business. The other parts are true. And the Ramban has an amazing insight. Says the Ramban, Shanulo bidavar. Yes, they knew they were mishaneh. They were lying to some extent. However, mipnei hashalom, right? It's mutar lishanot mipnei hashalom. Kidei sheyishma aleihem lishloach otam binyamin. The brothers knew it's inevitable. Of course, Yaakov's going to have to send Binyamin back with them. And they knew it was the right thing to do. And so they basically changed the facts when they talked to Yaakov to incentivize him to send Binyamin. Ki biritzonam miyad hayu chozrim. They would have gone back immediately. Lulei sha'amar lo yelech b'ni imachem. Right? It was almost, the Ramban is hinting, Yaakov was being almost irrational. Binyamin wasn't a baby at the time. He was going with his brothers. But he said, no, I'm not going to send Binyamin. V'chein amru lo achichem ha'echad. Then he said, achichem ha'echad hanichu iti, v'lo higidu lo ma'asram, v'lo ma'asar Shimon. Right? They didn't talk about the fact that they were put in jail for 3 days and that Shimon was put in jail. V'yitachein she'amar lahem Yosef ve'et haaretz tischaru, v'lo sipru ha'katuv. Right? It also could be, as Ramban said before, it's a theme of the Ramban. The Torah is telling us now that Yosef said, ve'et haaretz tischaru. It seems unlikely, because why would Yosef have withheld the ability from anybody to do business in Mitzrayim? But he's saying, v'chein b'mekamot rabim yikatzer b'ma'aseh o b'sipur kasher izkarti. Right? The Torah often is expansive in one place and very, very concise in another place. And it's hard to know why, and it's hard to know when. But that's just a klal in reading the stories in the Torah. Understand, sometimes the Torah gives you all the details, and sometimes it just hints at the details, but maybe the brothers did not in fact mislead Yaakov. But the sense you get is that the brothers were ish echad b'lev echad, they have to go back and free Shimon. Right? He's one of the main brothers. And they have to do that at the cost of taking Binyamin. And they're going to tell their father what they have to tell him in order for that to happen. And then you get to the next pasuk. Pasuk Lamed Zayin, which we often read but don't focus on enough. First, Vayomer Alehem Yaakov Avihem Otishi Kaltem. Right? It's me who you've made miserable. Yosef Einenu, V'Shimon Einenu, V'et Binyamin Tikachu Alaiha Yuchulana. Vayomer Reuven El Aviv Lemor. Et Shnei Vanai Tamit Imlo Avienu Elecha. We normally think that this makes Reuven sound like a fool. You could kill my 2 sons if I don't bring him back to you. To know, to al yadi, vani ashivenu elecha. Okay? And it's not a winning argument, and Yaakov rejects it. But says the Ramban, don't be so fast. At Shnei Banai Tamid, it's not as silly as Rashi makes it. He's not telling his father, you could kill my 2 sons. Kibel Allah be'Allah, he's swearing to his father, lahavio el aviv, to bring Binyamin back to him. Ki amar lo, et shnei vanai tamit, bihiyot anshecha alai, imlo ashiveno elecha. It's exactly like Yehuda says later. Maybe he used the wrong words. He doesn't mean kill my 2 sons. And then like Rashi says, Yaakov thinks, what an idiot. Is it going to be, if I kill my grandsons, it's going to make me feel any better? He says, no, he's swearing to him. He's saying, I'm going to be obligated to you. It's exactly what Yehuda said later. Wait, Reuben had 4 sons. So he says, no, he said it with, the thought was, Lemor, 2 of my sons will equal 1 of your sons. If God forbid something goes wrong with Binyamin, I'll be obligated to you for 2 sons in place of Binyamin, and for 2 sons in place of Shimon. So why did Yaakov reject it? It made so much sense. So Ramban suggests 2 ideas. First, V'hinei Yaakov lo batach b'Reuven kasher batach b'Yehuda. Ki Yehuda gavar alachav. Yeah, it's true. Sometimes it's not what you say, it's who says it. Yaakov was more willing to hear it from Yehuda than he was from Reuven, because Yehuda was the leader of the brothers, and he didn't have the respect for Reuven that he had for Yehuda. That's one possibility. Second, va'od, ki Reuven kvar pasha ba'aviv, v'lo yiftach bo. Right? Reuven was mechalel yitzuei aviv, and the story with Bilhah, and therefore he didn't trust Reuven. Vahaklal, a bigger idea, says the Ramban. Ki hayta atzat Yehuda tova lahanichol lezaken. Yehuda had a better idea. It wasn't anything to do with his sons. It was that Yehuda said, let's wait. Yaakov is old, right? The sense you get, they were playing their father. Yaakov is old. We're going to run out of food, and he's going to need food. Ad she yichle pat min habayit, ki az yishma, v'hu ma she'amar lo v'nichye v'lo namut gam anachnu gam tapenu. Right? When they ran out of food, and Yehuda said to him, we need to go back or we're going to die, that was the winning argument. It wasn't that he promised him his sons or anything like that. It was, one, who Yehuda was. Yehuda was the son who Yaakov Avinu respected. He had his brother's respect. He was a leader amongst the brothers and he respected him. And 2, he waited. He waited until they ran out of food. He waited till Yaakov was an old man and realized they had no choice. And then Yaakov kind of resignedly says, okay, take him. But what does he say? And this will be the last Ramban we do, and it's really an amazing insight. Vayhi kasher kilu le'achol ha'tasheva asher heviu mimitzrayim, vayomer alehem avihem shivu lanu mat ochel. Okay, and then Yehuda says, well, we can't go back, because the man made us swear that without our little brother we can't return. And so Yaakov agrees. And then in Pasuk Yudal he says, Ve'el Shaddai yitein lachem rachamim lifnei ha'ish, v'shilach lachem et achichem acher ve'et Binyamin, va'ani ka'asher shacholti shachalti. And you can't but notice, v'shilach lachem et achichem acher ve'et Binyamin. Why does he say v'shilach lachem et Shimon ve'et Binyamin? Right? Why not the name? And says the Ramban, V'shilach lachem et achichem acher ve'et Binyamin, nireh al derech hapshat, ki lo haya Shimon ritzui aviv, ba'avur dvar Shechem. Right? Yaakov Avinu disrespected Shimon because of his sin. If you remember back, we didn't do it this year, we did it last year, right? Yaakov Avinu was against this whole idea of massacring Shechem. And in a few weeks in Parshas Vayechi, we're going to see Yaakov Avinu is still angry at Shimon. So says the Ramban, he didn't want to use his name. Just like any parent, when they're really angry at a child, they refer to the child, but they don't say his name. Ulekach lo amar et Shimon bini ve'et Binyamin, ki lo yazkirenu bishmo. He didn't want to mention by name. And maybe, the Ramban is hinting, maybe that's also why they came back and they said, to get Shimon out of jail, we have to bring Binyamin. And he said, no, I don't like Shimon. Shimon's a bad guy. It's hard to say that about one of the Shvatim, but the sense you get here, and again in Vayechi, where it's very, very clear, Shimon did a sin in Shechem, and Yaakov says, okay, so he'll suffer for it. V'kasher azvu b'mitzrayim yamim rabim, ilu haya b'veito lechem lo shalach adayin et Binyamin, v'yanichu b'mitzrayim. He says, and had they had enough food, Yaakov would have left Shimon in Mitzrayim. He wouldn't have sent Binyamin. It wasn't worth it to him, right? He thought he was angry at Shimon. Now, what about the pshat that we all know, which is really a lovely, lovely pshat, which Rashi mentions? V'Rashi katav Ruach HaKodesh nitznetza bo l'rabot et Yosef. No, the Medrash says, when he says V'shilach lechem et achichem acher ve'et Binyamin, it doesn't mean Shimon. It means Yosef. So says the Ramban, U'b'reishis Rabba gam kein amru V'shilach lechem et achichem ze Yosef acher ze Shimon. Right? He wanted all his sons back. It wasn't as bad as the Ramban says. V'nachonhu, and the Ramban says, yeah, that could be. I think that's right. Ki natan da'ato be'et hatfilah lihitpalel stam gam al ha'acher ulay odenu chai. He says, in that moment, when Yaakov Avinu was davening, that it should go well, and that they should come back with Shimon and Binyamin, it dawns on him, says the Ramban, wait, I have another son. And it's true. Overwhelmingly, I thought it's likely that Taraf Yosef Chayara Chalatu, that he's dead. But now that I see all my sons that I'm risking and that are missing, and I don't know, maybe Vishilach Lachem et Achichem Acher, maybe Yosef will come back. Maybe something great will happen. Some kind of miracle will take place, and I'll get back all my sons. And the Ramban sees that here. Yes, it's a medrash, and yes, he thinks pshat is that he didn't want to say Shimon's name because he was so angry at him. But he says it could be when Yaakov was davening, he thought to himself, wait, maybe I'll get Yosef back. Okay, so let's just review what we did. We did a great Ramban on Chanuka, which if you look at inside, I think you'll see even more things that we talked about together. And then we did this week's Parsha. Asher inu tzarat nafsho b'itchanano eleinu, right? That the brothers saw Yosef begging. And that was worse to them, that their hard-heartedness when their brother begged them was worse than the actual sale. Why does the Torah tell us that? Either it doesn't want to make the brothers look so bad, or, okay, it tells us that here. Yeah, and sometimes the Torah is Miketz in one place and marchiv in another place, and that's just how we as readers of the Torah have to understand it. Right, it never happened. They wanted Yaakov to send Binyamin down, so they shinu mipnei hashalom, right? So they said what they had to say to get him to do it. Great. At Shnei Banai Tamid, says the Ramban, Reuven's argument was very strong. It was just as good as Yehuda's. But it could be that Yaakov Avinu didn't respect Reuven the way he respected Yehuda, didn't think Reuven could deliver the way he was sure that Reuven could deliver. But otherwise, you should know that Reuven said the same exact thing as Yehuda. It wasn't a silly argument. He wasn't saying, kill my two children. He was saying, I'll be chayiv to you in some way, 2 children for 1. Reuven had 4 children, so 2 for Binyamin, and 2 for Shimon. And finally, the winning argument, and when Yaakov Avinu says, fine, do it, V'shilach lechem et achichem acher ve'et Binyamin, yes, he didn't say et Shimon ve'et Binyamin, because he didn't like Shimon, because he was still really, really angry at him over what happened in Shechem. That anger is going to continue until the end of Sefer Breishis. But it's also possible that he thought to himself, achichem acher meant Yosef. And that although he thought that it was probably likely that Yosef was dead, all of a sudden, in this moment, Yaakov realized maybe there's a possibility, and nitznetza bo ruach hakodesh, and the Ramban thinks that that's also a wonderful and a possible pshat. Okay, yashkach to everybody. Chanuka sameach. Shabbat shalom.